So I wanted to talk about this post from a guy in PSA Sitch. Seems like an interesting dude, and I've seen some of his posts before. This one caught my eye. So I'm going to read it and then respond to a few things about it. I agree with some parts of it. I don't agree with other parts of it. So let's go here. All right, I keep hearing people say Israel has all the power to end the situation and make everything better for the people in Gaza, so therefore everything that happens is Israel's fault. In reality, it's the opposite. Hamas is the only group with the power to stop the violence and resolve the conflict. On the surface, that does seem like a reasonable statement, but I don't agree, and for a variety of reasons. We'll get into it in a moment. If Israel decided not to attack Gaza, ends the blockade, allowing them to get whatever they want, and even allow open travel between Gaza and Israel, Hamas would not suddenly become peaceful. They would get more weapons and attack Israel more, not less. The violence would increase. So that's his supposition. We do have some evidence to back that up. The Hamas does continuously find reasons to come up with weapons. They continuously produce them using water pipes, which they even made video of themselves digging up water pipes for the citizens of Gaza to turn them into rockets. So that is a legitimate criticism. I will certainly say that. However, to say that Hamas would do none of those things, we'll get into that in a sec here. All right, so, however, if Hamas decided that instead of attacking Israel by sending people to brutally kill Israeli civilians, instead, they said their goal was to actually make things better for the people in Gaza, so they acknowledge Israel as a country, stop firing rockets, hand over all that military equipment, stop others in Gaza from committing violence, actually used foreign aid to build up Gaza's infrastructure and economy, then most of their problems would be solved. Not overnight, of course, but they could maintain that for some years. Then the blockade would end, and restricted travel would end, and Gaza would have so many of its problems solved. Only Hamas has the power to make things better. So let's talk about some of these statements here, because this is where we're going to get into some of this borders on propaganda. So let's start with here. If they decided to stop brutally killing Israeli civilians, I agree with that. I don't like seeing civilians targeted. In 2014, Hamas did exactly this, and they targeted Israeli bases. They went and raided them. They dug tunnels. They purposefully went past a kibbutz and attacked just military targets. And in that war between the two of them, which Israel called Protective Edge, Israel lost 62 soldiers and a dozen or so civilians. So the vast majority of people killed in that incursion were soldiers, not civilians, soldiers. So Hamas did exactly that. What did Israel do? Same thing they're doing right now. What did the international community do? Same thing that they're saying right now. So Hamas has no incentive. And again, I don't support Hamas, but I do support truth. One of the things that he's not talked about here is, how did Hamas come to start? How did Hamas come to be? Israel created Hamas by financing them to fracture the PLO, to make the Palestinians divided so that they would be easier to deal with. And now Hamas has become an ultra-powerful organization that goes much beyond what Israel had initially intended to do. The fact remains, Israel created this monster. So you want to talk about what's Israel's fault? Hamas is Israel's fault, because Hamas wouldn't exist without Israeli money. It was Israeli money in the late 70s and 80s that made Hamas the entity that it is. And it worked well for Israel for quite some time to divide the Palestinians. Now it's coming back to bite them. This is what happens when you finance radicals. This is the same thing that happened with America. ISIS is the creation of America. It's because America financed them, funded them, armed them, allowed them to get weapons from Libya after we took out Gaddafi, which Gaddafi warned and specifically said Al-Qaeda will come in, which they did, and then they became ISIS. So we did the same thing. You bite the hand that feeds you. Everything ends up biting the hands that feed you. Don't feed these things. Don't create terrorist organizations to go do your dirty work like we did with Al-Qaeda in the 1980s with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda means the database and is our word for them. And Hamas was created by Israel to do their dirty work and splinter the PLO. So you've created this problem. So you don't get to sit there and pretend that everything only happened since, like the world didn't start on October 7th. There were things that happened beforehand. I'm not a big fan of the 75 years excuse that you hear from Palestinians, but it didn't start on October 7th. So again, going back to when Hamas did exactly what this guy said, which is to not target civilians, but target soldiers, the exact same thing happened. Nothing changed. And in fact, Israel went in and produced fake documents that showed that they were supposed to show that Hamas was targeting civilians. They were lies. They were photoshopped, and they were poorly photoshopped. Israel got caught, called out on the lie, and then the protective edge ended shortly thereafter. So it's not accurate to say that just, that if they only targeted soldiers, that we would treat them different. No, that's not true. They said their goal was to actually make things better for the people in Gaza. Yeah, they've actually tried to do that. They did acknowledge Israel as a country. In 2015, Hamas unilaterally said that they would stop firing missiles, and they did for a long time. They actually did do that. I'll give them praise there. They did finally decide that it wasn't a good idea to target civilians, so they stopped doing it. And Hamas has said they will recognize Israel. Hamas has also said they would go back to the 67 borders. Israel has then changed the story. They say, first, Israel says you can come to the table with no preconditions. Hamas says, okay. Now Israel refuses. Sorry, but that's just the way it is. And they did stop firing rockets. It didn't change anything on the ground. Israel continued to build settlements. So Hamas did what you said, and then you didn't do what you had said. Israel's violated all of its deals too. Both sides have. Like, let's look at the Oslo Accords. Both sides broke their deals. So which side's trustworthy? Neither of them is what it is. Okay, so stopped others in Gaza from committing violence. So that would be Islamic Jihad, which it's interesting because if you look at some of the back and forth between them, it kind of looks like Islamic Jihad gets paid to screw things up for Hamas and make Hamas's job more difficult to rule Gaza. That's speculation. I don't know of any hard evidence between that. I do know that Israel was happy to help ISIS. This whole Hamas is ISIS thing that Israel keeps saying now. Israel provided material support to ISIS when they were attacking Syria. They provided them with medical support and weapons too, and money. So, yeah, Israel supports ISIS and they supported Hamas. So, actually used foreign aid to build up Gaza's infrastructure and economy. I agree with that. That is something that definitely should be happening. And I've said for years that Hamas, what they need to do is completely stop their military offensive and just document and record all the things that Israel does, all of the settlements, all of the violence. There is violence that comes from Israeli settlers. They do harm Palestinians quite regularly, and it is on video. And then always conveniently, Hamas blows up civilians, and then we don't talk about what Israel does at all. And so that's my biggest problem, is the idea that it's only Hamas that can control this outcome. No, Israel's bombing tower blocks right now. They've flattened huge swaths of Gaza, and thousands of innocent children are dead. On the Israeli side, they had over 1,000 died. The traditional rule is for every Israeli, 10 to 20 Palestinians have to die. That's what every other conflict has been. So when we get to around 10 to 15,000 dead Palestinians, the Israelis will consider stopping their bombing campaign. They've already killed more in this conflict than any other in the last 20 plus years. They've already dropped more bombs in the 10 days that they've been bombing than they did for the entire 20 years prior to that. So obviously this is a different situation, and obviously it's going to come to a slightly different end result. One thing I will say is that Hamas isn't going to be destroyed. You can't destroy an idea. Their leadership is in Qatar, safely protected, and Israel has no real reason to. Why would they actually want to get rid of Hamas? That would take away the thing that has always helped out Bibi. Every time Bibi's in trouble, Hamas comes to save the day by launching rockets and then uniting all of Israel behind Bibi. Now he's got a coalition government, gets to do whatever he wants. Prior to this, he was facing massive uprisings and the prospect of a divided government, which doesn't work under the Israeli system. So it's worked out really well for Netanyahu. Really well for him. And so let's finish this. So not overnight, of course, right? Not overnight, but they could maintain that for some years. And during those years, Israel will continue to build settlements inside of the territory the Palestinians want for their land. And so I agree. I mean, this is basically a no-win situation because there's extremists on both sides. The extremists on the Palestinian side say from the river to the sea and want to just get rid of all the Jews. That's not a tenable solution. On the Jewish side, there are Jewish people that are saying get rid of all of the Palestinians. There, I can point to dozens of people that have talked about ethnic cleansing the Palestinians, completely removing them. That's the extreme end of that. So we have both extremes that want to annihilate each other. This doesn't end particularly well. And when we're trying to place all the blame on one organization or the other without addressing the underlying problems being you have millions of people that don't have a place to live on one side of a wall and millions of people on the other side of the wall that would like to have that place for their own. So what is the best solution to that? I don't have the answer to that, but I do know that it's not more propaganda, it's not more war, and it's not blaming Hamas entirely while Israel is bombing civilian infrastructure. Oh, and continuously bombing Lebanon and Syria, trying to provoke a wider war. Let me ask one final question. What would happen if the U.S. cut Israel off? If Israel had no more American money to continue to operate with impunity, would it be more motivated to find and make peace with its neighbors if it had to defend itself?